are now going into our second breakout session here. This is on RTD Beverage Alcohol Category Opportunity Briefing. I mean, that sounds pretty standardized, kind of title for this kind of thing, but there's really so much to unpack here. And, originally we had, I think it was titled as RTD Spirits, but, the movement and the momentum around this space is not just in RTD Spirits, it is in RTD Beverage Alcohol, hard kombucha, seltzers. I mean, we're just coming out of White Claw Summer. I think so White Claw Summer is still going for some people. So there's really a lot to explore here, and I'm really happy that we got two great experts to share their perspective on that. We're going to start with Brandy Rand, who is the CEO Americas of IWSR. It's one of the most widely used sources for alcohol beverage trends. They work very close with a lot of brands. Brandy was just here, so I'll just let her get started. Brandy, come on up.
We were just talking about low and no alcohol, and now we're going to go to RTDs because there's a lot of crossover into this. So I'm going to talk about ready-to-drink beverages. So for those of you, there's a lot of acronyms when we start talking about this space. So there's RTDs and FABs, which is flavored alcoholic beverages, and FMBs, which is flavored malt beverages, and probably several more that are coming up. So what's interesting is we track globally, including the U.S., all markets, and we look at this as one big category. So we have spirits, and we have beer, and we have wine, and we have cider, and then we have all of these kind of ready-to-drink products. And there's a lot of innovation and a lot of differences between all of these products. So I'm going to talk you through kind of the rise of this because it's a really dynamic, and for the US, it's the fastest growing category in the US. Most of the innovation that's happening is in this space. It's a bit of a catch-all, but there's a consumer demand for a lot of factors, which I'm going to talk about. So it's a pretty exciting time. So what are the key trends? Well, the first thing that I always find it's fascinating, so I have access to this massive database, right, for all these countries, and it goes back 40, 50 years. And what I find is really interesting is when I was looking at RTDs, US, Japan, and Australia account for 65% of the world's volume for ready-to-drink beverages. And that's actually pretty staggering. It's really an interesting market, right? US and Japan kind of flip-flop between number 1 and 2, and I think right now US is 1 percentage points ahead, which a lot of it has to do with seltzers, which I'll talk about. We know that health-conscious consumers are looking for low alcohol, low sugar, kind of low-calorie products. So that's been a big driver in innovation in this RTD segment. We also know that wine and spirit-based RTDs are increasing with the same kind of better-for-you cues as hard seltzers, which are FMBs. Why that's important is sort of an aside. So anyone who's looking to get into a ready-to-drink alcoholic beverage, right, there's big tax differences between malt, wine, and spirits. So that's something to consider, and there's a lot of nuances with states, with ABVs. It's a very kind of complex beverage alcohol market, and so you'll see that most of this category is being driven by malt-based beverages because it's cheaper. Conversely, we're also seeing these kind of higher ABV RTDs, these Four Locos and some of these other kind of Mike's Harder Lemonade, ones that are showing some growth. And there's mainstay brands like the Hard Lemonade and Twisted Tea. It seems a little counterintuitive because we're talking about low alcohol, low sugar, this big wellness trend, but there's still some growth in people that are pounding back Twisted Teas and 40 grams of sugar in a Mike's Hard Lemonade with no problem. So there's a little bit of a converse, that there's a different, I think, age demographic, certainly when we're talking about that, but there is some sustained growth in that category as well for those types of products. And then a lot of the stuff we're all drinking here today, some of it doesn't have alcohol in it, I think most of it doesn't, but hard coffees, hard teas, and functional beverages, right? So products that have better-for-you cues that actually have alcohol in them or lower alcohol or are as a substitute for a no-alcohol product. So there's a lot of innovation overall in this RTD space. Why is this happening? I could talk about this for an hour, but there's a couple of key things that I think that have kind of come to the forefront for me when I talk to a lot of our clients and I go to these conferences and I look at all these products. Food and beverage is medicine, right? So think about this. 20 years ago, if you talk to your parents, people they were consuming so they wouldn't pass out when they were farming or they were going to work or they needed a banana or they needed cornflakes, right? Now we look at food and beverage as medicine, right? We want to know what we put into our bodies, and the more cues, whether it has vitamins or minerals or low sugar or low calorie or low carb, we as a society really care about those things, and so every kind of label on every single package of what we put in our body matters, and it's like medicine. The mood-based consumption part is actually very interesting. That's a big thing that we've seen through the rise of cannabis and CBD products, but also by example here, I'm showing you a couple of other products. What do I mean by mood-based consumption, right? So it used to be you get home from work or you've had a bad day and you just want to have a glass of wine to unwind. Now we have products that are actually talking about how they make you feel. So CBD products, this is brain fuel. This is rest easy. I mean, if you just go look at any of these products, a lot of them have cues for how is this gonna make me feel. So we're almost skipping over to people and just saying, hey, we're gonna help you to decode all these labels. How do you wanna feel? Do you need to be less stressed out? Do you need to sleep better? What are the things that you wanna feel? We have this tea line, so tranquility, sensuality. I mean, there's some wine brands. So this wine brand, the labels are great minds drink alike, I am woman, hear me pour. Like, these are just things that are about occasions and moods. We're trying to connect to consumers for saying, how do you want to feel? And I think that's pretty significant when you start talking about this rise in ready-to-drink beverages. And the next part is cannabis beverages. Right now, if you look at the edible volume share, so cannabis beverages, when you look at the liquid part, it's considered an edible because you're digesting it. Candy's still the biggest chunk of it, but the beverages is about 6%, worth about 48 million, but it's projected to grow significantly. And we're seeing more and more products that are having either THC or CBD in there. And there's, of course, a lot of legalities around all of this that I'm sure most of us are aware. But I do think what's interesting is what's going to be happening in Canada in the next week, right? So edibles and beverages are all going to become legal in Canada. And so there's a lot of testing that a lot of US companies are doing in Canada to start figuring out what that's going to mean. And there's a lot of complexities here, but this is a big part of this kind of functional and ready-to-drink beverage space. And the other thing that's interesting is cans, okay? Wasn't too long ago, and I've been in this business for about 20 years, mostly on the spirit side, wasn't too long ago that cans were seen as less quality, right? They were. I mean, people drink cans. It was considered cheap beer for cans. Now we have canned wine. We have canned spirits. We have canned cocktails. We have canned everything. Cans are really important because of a few reasons. Younger generations in particular are not fussy about things like boxed wine and canned cocktails. They care about carbon footprint. They care about sustainability, and they care about convenience. It's more about, does this product fit my lifestyle? Can I take it with me? Is it convenient? And does it give me the things that I desire, right? It's quality, sure, but they're less fussy about my wine has to be served by a guy in a suit and tie who's opening it at the table and sniffing the cork. Nobody cares about that anymore, right? People want convenience. They want to take it where they go. So this is tapping into a lot of new occasions. And when I talk to beer folks, right, so beer has been in decline slowly for about 20 years now as wine and spirits have been taking share. There's a couple reasons for that, but the interesting part of it is that beers sort of own cans. And then wine and spirits started coming and tapping into beer occasions. And I think this is really opening up a lot of interesting conversations, certainly in the Bev Alc space. So this is just a quick chart on beverage alcohol in the US. So the pink bar is the future growth, and the blue bar is the past 5 years. So we have the past 5 years and then the next 5 years. And what's really interesting is you can see that RTDs, which are in the middle here, are projected to have the highest sort of future 5-year growth compared to any other category. We know that beer is declining, and wine and spirits, while they're growing, the projected growth is slowing down a bit, right? So we had these big booms. And then RTDs is the biggest, kind of the sexiest space for beverage alcohol right now. Hard seltzers, I'm sorry, we have to talk about hard seltzers. Every beverage conference I go to, especially in the alcohol, it's hard seltzers. It's like it's a unicorn, right, for the industry. It's a unicorn for a couple of different reasons, which I'll talk about. But if we look at the kind of ready-to-drink FAB segment that we track, seltzers are a majority of that RTD space. So they're about 43% market share, and it's only gonna grow more and more. So that's pretty significant. So you have a category that's been around for a while that was very fad-based. What I mean by fad-based is you had sort of the hard sodas, and you had all these different sort of innovation, and it would spike up and then go down and spike up and go down. Hard seltzers have been around actually for several years, and we had this White Claw summer, and we've had a lot of innovation and new brand launches, and now everybody has a seltzer. And what seltzers did is they created a really, almost a new category. So we broke it out recently for this new seltzer report we did to start looking at hard seltzers, but also seltzer adjacent categories. So things that are sparkling, clear, refreshing, spritzy, all these words that people like that are kind of falling under this hard seltzer universe. I found this very interesting. So we're talking to some of our analysts, and I said, let's look at 2018. So if you look at the United States, we are a beer drinking country. So if you equivalize volume, just pure sales volume, beer has been the lion's share of volume sold in the US. It always has been, right? We're a beer drinking country, but it's been shrinking. Wine and spirits are a good chunk of that. And then seltzer universe just last year was less than 1%. Go to this year, seltzer universe is almost 3%. It's almost like its own category. And that happened pretty quickly. And this is significant. Now listen, I live and breathe data on this stuff all the time, but even when I saw these numbers, because I was curious to see if we broke it out compared to spirits and all these, what does it look like? This is actually pretty significant. So when people are talking about seltzers, and talking about the RTD category and doing it with excitement, there's a reason for it because it's actually quite an interesting phenomenon that's happening right now. Why hard seltzers? Well, a couple of things. They appeal to all genders and age groups, right? So we, I think, had a big gap for beverage alcohol because people didn't have what they wanted, which was refreshment. They wanted refreshment, they wanted something that was convenient in cans, they wanted something that had some transparency in ABV, calories, sugar, carbs. So there's all this kind of perfect storm. In the last session, we talked about wellness and this growth, and seltzers really just jumped in and they fit all of these things. We had this kind of boom where there was white space and seltzers actually appealed to a lot of different people. There's portability, ease of consumption. There's a perception that seltzer is healthier than a lot of other beverage alcohol products. And also there's the ability to modify. We know sparkling water has been growing for years and people are really into sparkling water, and suddenly you have something that's like an alcoholic sparkling water. And it's funny because when I talked to colleagues overseas and I started trying to tell them about seltzers, everyone looked at me like I had 4 heads, and I finally said, it's sparkling water with alcohol. And they're like, really? Because just for Europeans, when you start talking about that, it just seems really weird that Americans want alcoholic water. But here we do. What's interesting too, and we did some consumer survey, is that almost half of consumers add spirits to this. They're treating it like a mixer. So that's really interesting. And then we also did some work with bartenders, and we found that a lot of bartenders are interested in using it as a mixer as well. So there's kind of a lot of interesting stuff going on with hard seltzers. And if we look at trends and innovation, we're seeing hard seltzers on tap. That's pretty interesting. We're seeing value-priced offerings, higher ABV ones, actually lower ABV ones. Definitely some health awareness, right? So if you go to any sort of liquor store and you stand and look at that sort of the section, usually it's on the floor, and there's a ton of different seltzer-like products. I have to spend some time looking because I'm like, is this malt-based? Is it spirit-based? Is it wine-based? Does this one have calories? This one has sugar? But to consumers, they look at things in cans that are seltzer-like and have that portability, that refreshment, that flavor, and it matters. We're seeing collaborations, right, where brands are sort of pairing together to put, like, I'm a water brand, you're an alcohol brand, let's do some cool stuff. We're seeing these non-alc CBD seltzers. We're seeing cocktail seltzers, right? So you're seeing old-fashioned seltzers. It's just crazy. Everyone is seltzer crazy. And then, of course, innovative flavors. So there was a brand, I think it's called Willie's, that just launched the first kind of seasonal seltzer, and I think it was a pear and cinnamon one. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in this space. So I will happily take questions because I am a bit seltzer crazy now. I can talk about it for a while, but I want to turn it over to these guys to tell about your experience, because I'd love to hear more about what you're doing in that canned space, and then we'll take some questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandy. Great. Before I introduce Sean, we're going to have a little conversation here, but I want to just remind everyone that we will be publishing these videos to YouTube. So you can check back in a week or so or later on this month, and you should be able to find them on our BevNET YouTube page, the complete presentation. Great. So we got a really great outlook on the opportunity here in this market, and now I'm really excited to talk to Sean Venus from Venus Spirits, because he can really provide that kind of personal perspective as someone who is, really going through this right now and really active in developing RTD products that can meet these kind of needs. So Sean is the founder and distiller at the Santa Cruz-based Venus Spirits. As I mentioned, it was founded in 2014. Small craft distillery, and is now recently extended into RTD spirits, and he's here to give us a little bit of his perspective on that journey. So, Sean, I wanted to just start, basically, you've had experience at Mama Chia, Purity Organic. You've had a lot of experience in the CPG industry. So I wanted to know what really personally attracted you to this opportunity in RTD.
Well, initially, actually, my prior experience was in beer, and I worked in kind of craft beer in the late 90s, early 2000s, and left that, went into non-alcoholic, and this is my kind of entrance back. It was really the industry that I left in 2004 was basically, in the craft beer world, was very similar to the craft spirits world in 2013, 2014. Saw a huge opportunity. I think early on, we looked at the ready-to-drinks. Within a year or two of starting the brand, it was really quickly apparent that consumption of cocktails was driving our 750 ml programs, whether it would be on-premise or off-prem. We looked at glass. The packaging wasn't right. The timing wasn't right. And then coming into this summer, seeing lots of brands kind of enter the category, around the country, a few in our neck of the woods, saw that there was a real opportunity to jump in this and try and make a business out of it.
As you're jumping in, well, I guess first we should maybe get a little bit of just a background on sort of the RTD products that you make, if you wouldn't mind just explaining those products.
So we do, they are ready-to-drink cocktails. There's 2 gin-based ones. We have a gin and tonic, cucumber gimlet with basil, and then a vodka mule. They're all 8% alcohol, roughly 200 calories, fresh pressed juices, really trying to mimic the high-quality spirits or cocktails that you can find in a restaurant bar occasion. So they're meant to be, the challenging thing for us with this is like you have this cocktail. We formulate it for a can, which people are going to take it to the beach. They're going to, consume it while they're golfing or on the couch. But it's also something that someone might pour over ice. And so you got to have a product that can both be consumed straight out of the can as well as, have that dilution factor, when you pour it over ice.
And talk to me a little bit about the timing of, deciding to get into this category. You mentioned that you saw that there was, activity in this segment, but sort of what really signaled you that this was the right time to get involved?
I started talking to people at the store level, just looking, talking to them how other products are going through, and talked to buyers. They were really excited because this, outside of like the hard seltzers where there's an established set, in the beer cooler, there really wasn't an established, set in the cooler or in any other part of the store for a spirit-based ready-to-drink cocktail. So they were very excited on bringing on more brands to kind of develop the category.
Now, as we've seen this segment grow, what kind of things have you heard from consumers, from retailers, from distributors? What kind of things are they looking for specifically in a RTD beverage alcohol product?
I think quality, yeah. I mean, I think, the history there is you've got brands that have been around for, decades, whether it be Club or, maybe some newer ones like Buzzball, and they're looking for something that it's a premium ready-to-drink cocktail, and I think that's the kind of void that we filled with ours. It's a little bit, it's twice as expensive as some of those other products, but it's definitely a higher quality.
In terms of presenting this product, is this something that you kind of present as a complementary choice to people who are making these drinks at home? Is this meant to be something to replace, or how do you sort of position it relative to existing cocktails?
Well, it's interesting because we've been kind of doing market research. We have a tasting room. We've been doing this stuff for about 5 years out of our tasting room, exploring cocktails, and it's kind of number one question: when are you going to can this stuff? When can we take it home? people, I mean, even us, like I'm in the industry and I know how to mix, dozens and dozens of cocktails. To come home and be able to open a can and pour it over ice and immediately, even a gin and tonic, which is probably the simplest cocktail you can make, it's the convenience factor is amazing.
Now, we heard some about attitudes towards cans changing a little bit. Obviously focusing on high quality ingredients in these RTD products. What have you encountered? Consumer skepticism, or have you had to sort of change people's minds at all on things like the can format or an RTD cocktail? And how do you sort of have those conversations?
Well, I mean, we do a lot of sampling, and that's kind of why we're actually down here, and we're going to be part of the event at the after party tonight, is to get these products in people's, in their hands, let them try them. Definitely perception is everything. We've done tabletop trade shows where bartenders are coming in and they're blown away that this is a cocktail that's came out of a can. It's really awesome to get that reaction, but it definitely is a challenge because there's that perception.
In terms of a marketing voice and consumer messaging, how would you describe the tone or positioning of Venus Spirits?
Well, I mean, our distillery is like right on the water. We literally can walk out our driveway and we can see the Pacific Ocean. We played a lot with that in the packaging on this. Basically, it's kind of a nod that you can take this to the lake, take it to the water, bring it with you. It's a portable package, and we're trying to use that in our kind of both in the design as well as the choice of packaging is just to get it to people to understand that it's a portable product.
I think we heard a little bit earlier about sort of changing attitudes towards consumption of alcohol, maybe. People may be drinking a little bit less. Have you guys had to sort of encountered any resistance in that sense? Or are you finding that certain demographics are sort of just looking to consume less alcohol in general?
Well, I think that we kind of follow some of the other trends that were a part of that is people may be drinking less, but they're going to be drinking more premium products. So we definitely follow that trend. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you face from a distribution standpoint in terms of, not only just getting this into stores, but where it actually lives in the store and where it's most effectively merchandised?
Yeah, I mean, that is the challenging thing. Some stores, there's a competing thing. You've got a wine spirits buyer and you've got a beer buyer. Beer buyer controls that cooler, and this is ideally where we want this product to be. And so there might be some ebb and push on getting some space in that premium, shelf space. I would say that was, definitely the most challenging. And where do people find it? If there's in Whole Foods in Northern California, you can find this product merchandised in 3 different sections of their store. So getting the consumer trained, is it next to the canned wine? Is it on the shelf, dry shelf, or is it in next to beer? It's confusing at this point.
And for you, ideally, it should be its own section. Where should it be?
I'm a beer drinker as well, and I personally like to survey that whole line before I make that decision. Having it right next to that is probably my ideal location.
How are you guys approaching innovation? I mean, we heard a lot about the seltzers and different kind of things going on. Do you guys see yourself as sticking close to the RTD cocktails, or do you see this as a overall sort of alcohol beverage play?
Yeah, I mean, this is just an offshoot of what our current business is. It definitely puts us in different distribution platforms. But it's for us. It's all about building the brand of Venus and bringing it out there. And this is one medium. It has our gin in it or our vodka, and people can go to another section of the store and buy that. And we do also find that people do fortify these spirits or these cocktails with more, with vodka or more gin. So it's kind of interesting.
Got thirsty fans out there.
We share more similarities to seltzer than I thought we did.
Well, just as someone who's been through the brand building in the spot, do you have any sort of basically any tips or advice for sort of really getting started and really finding your footing as this category gets a little bit more competitive?
Yeah, I mean, there's the beauty about this is there's like no barrier to entry. Wine and canned beer has kind of built this whole platform for us to get into this, and whether there's mobile canning sites that come to your location, or you use a co-packer, there's a whole network out there. This makes it a lot easier than it did probably about 5 to 10 years ago. So I think you're going to find a lot of regional opportunities to become the ready to drink cocktail in your part of the country.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. I want to save some time to open this up for questions, but a quick round of applause for Sean. Great. If any of you guys have questions, just raise your hand. I'll come bring you the mic, and we can go from there. Sir?
Hey, Frank from Nessie. You mentioned something about the dilution factor, and I wonder if you could go into it a little bit more. Like, how do you make that decision? Because you're not in full control over how the consumer is going to actually consume your product, if they're going to put it on rice, if they're going to just have it out at a party for a couple hours and then drink it warm. Like, how did you decide on that formulation part?
We played around with it. The first run we did, it was a little bit too sweet. We listened to feedback from people, and we kind of played around with it. We got some feedback from our buyer that was too boozy. There's lots of you're never going to get everyone completely satisfied on it, but it's a challenge.
Any other questions?
Hey, thanks. Jonas Feliciano from Ingredion. In terms of formulating and talking about taste and preferences specifically in this category, where do you see sort of the battle between low sugar and lack of sweetness coming into play against the idea of taste being a leading factor in the development of these products?
Well, I think the beauty is in this type of product is you don't have to declare ingredients. So people don't really, and it's, as of for right now, you don't have to do nutritionals either for this type of product. So people really can make decisions on how they taste it, and so I think people do like sugar. They like things sweet, and they just don't like it for health reasons. And we've played around with it, trying to making it as low as sugar as we can. And we'll see where it goes.
I think a really interesting, there's two things I wanted to bring up. And I think the first one that when you were talking about earlier, that's really important when you are talking about this kind of canned and this RTD phenomenon that's happening, is people want portion control. So if you think about if you've ever gone to probably one of your favorite bars that happens to free pour and give you really good gin and tonic, you might be drinking 6, 7, 8 ounces of gin, which is not a normal serving, right? So if you look at about 100 calories a shot, your gin and tonic at an average bar could be, with tonic too, is 500-700 calorie drink, right? So consumers are becoming much more aware of portion control, right? 100 calorie packs, remember those things that are out everywhere? They didn't used to exist before. So the idea of having a cocktail in a can, 200 calories is actually a very reasonable amount of calories for a cocktail. It's measured. You know what you're drinking, you kind of can control that pour. And I think that's something that consumers are really gravitating towards, especially as you see the growth in these cocktail in a can and spirits, is it's portion control. You know exactly what you're getting. It's not too much, it's not too little. And then to answer the question on that kind of taste kind of profile element of it, I think for most consumers, when they're trying things with taste, they're gonna add things or delete things, but you're never going to make everybody happy, to your point, with all of that stuff. And I think that's, ultimately consumers can try this. The price point is another big thing. So a bottle of spirits is a lot more expensive than buying a 6-pack. So we have seen more and more that instead of buying a bottle of craft gin for $40 or $50, someone's probably more willing to try these cans of craft spirits for less cost. And if they don't like it, it's not sweet, then they're not spending $40 and it's not sitting there. So that's another part to pay attention to.
We actually see volume grow on this is when it's sold singles. That's where most of the volume is, opposed to multi-packs.
I have a question for Brandy on the sugar side. Can you guys hear me? What did I say?
We can hear you.
You can hear me with that, all right? So it's interesting. I think sometimes we're in California, like a lot of natural products people here. There's a crossover. I'm interested to see if your data, like how does that, who really is drinking or eating low sugar? I mean, I think we get in a bubble sometimes. I look at, a couple months ago, One Bar and Quest Bar, it's $1.5 billion worth of buyouts within 3 weeks of each other. And it's like birthday cake flavored sucralose. Do people care about the flavor or the sugar? It's sort of, and how does that cross into beverage? Because
Well,
I think he's right. I mean, people, as it turns out, like people do kind of like sugar and fat. So are they trying to have it all?
Yeah, my answer to the question is going to be, well, what's the occasion, right? I can't think, if I asked everyone in this room, we all have times we're trying to be good, right? And we're trying to eat healthy and you're choosing salad over a cheeseburger, but you're not eating cheeseburgers. So I think there's a balance, and alcohol, everyone knows, is an indulgence. It's an indulgent thing. And so there's times that you might have your key lime pie martini, and I cringe when I say this for many reasons. But you might have that and know that it's sugary and sweet, but it's like, hey, I'm going to splurge. I don't have these very often, just like you would a piece of cake. So I think it is a balance, but the whole anti-sugar movement is beyond beverage alcohol. I mean, I think the soda companies saw this. It's a much bigger thing. So that's an interesting question. So we just did a 15-city study with bartenders and talked to bartenders and asked them about trends, what people are drinking, brand call. And in the past, when we did this a year ago, we looked at East Coast versus West Coast, so New York versus LA. And New York people were like, don't tell me how to make my drinks. Don't tell me, if someone comes into my bar and asks for like low carb, vegan, whatever, they can get the hell out of my bar, right? So that was this whole New York attitude. And then LA, it's like, of course we can give you gluten-free, sugar-free, no animals hurt making this cocktail drink, right? So that was a very bicoastal. But then this latest round of research we did, I was reading, and I'm from the Boston area, and I was reading each kind of city. And Boston was a city that came, that the demand, bartenders were saying more and more people are asking for low-sugar cocktails. And I was like, wow, in Boston, really? Like, people are asking? And we saw this in Atlanta, we saw this in multiple markets where consumers are coming in, and I think a lot of this has to do with this hard seltzer thing, because people, start putting stuff on labels. It's like when Cheesecake Factory started putting calories on their menu. It's like, I don't want to know how many calories are in a slice of cheesecake. Like, you didn't know. Starbucks, the same thing. I mean, all these like grande mocha drinkers, you're like, damn it, like I didn't need to know that was 500 calories. But you start putting this stuff in front of people, you make them more aware of it. So now that people are like, oh, what, there's sugar in some of this alcohol? Wait, I didn't know that. And then they start asking for stuff, so.
Guess we have time for one quick question back here.
Hi, a question for Brandy. Do you think the hard seltzer it's only U.S. phenomenon or it's going worldwide?
That's a great question. We think, so we did some work in looking at other markets, and there are a few hard seltzers that have been are launching in the UK. They're calling them different things, though. They're calling it alcoholic sparkling water because the seltzer is a little bit of a US word, just like kind of club soda. It's a little bit different. So we looked at some key markets, and there's some pros and cons. We know that RTDs in certain markets are really big, as I had talked about, but in certain countries like Mexico, for example, they like sweet. Right? So you have to look at flavor and different markets and sort of adapting it. I was talking to a colleague of mine in Argentina who was like, it could do really well here. Then I was talking to a colleague of mine in Italy because they were saying, well, wouldn't it make sense if you look at high sparkling water consumption markets, right? And wouldn't that make sense? So Italians Pellegrino, then they would love that. But the feedback was, well, no, but Italians are very, like, there's a thing about their sparkling water. There's a purity, they're very protective of their sparkling water. So then you put alcohol in it, and that's offensive. It's almost like an offensive thing. So the answer is yes, there is and there will be, but it's going to be on a market-by-market basis. And also, don't forget that the U.S. is the most important beverage alcohol market in the world, and the rest of the world looks at the U.S. for innovation and trends. So if people are starting and talking about seltzers, there's going to be an interest from other markets that'll be demanding, I want to try this. And we see and hear it all the time now. So I do think there's going to be some kind of cross the pond in certain countries for sure.
Great, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys all for coming. If you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. Ding the bell and you'll know when the next one drops.